Oh, hi. There you are. I have been reflecting on what today's podcast should be about. In lieu of having a conversational partner, which, again, it'll happen eventually, but I need to get myself organized. But in the meantime, I've been reflecting on a couple of ideas, and I'd love to share them with you. Before we get started, let me just say my name's Andrew Ormiston. Welcome to the Heart Journey Home podcast. Christian conversations or monologues in today's case. Let's get started. So I wanted to reflect on this notion of kind of reading the Bible and bias. So the thing that postmodernism sort of gifted us with is this notion that everyone has a bias. Depending upon where and when you've lived, your particular upbringing, the culture you've come from, what language you speak, whatever kind of philosophical or cultural or religious influences you've had over the years, all of these things and many more influence how you interpret. It influences the frame of reference that you interpret, that you relate to, that you assume, and we bring all of that to how we read the Bible. I'd been reflecting earlier this week how many evangelistic programs, they're designed to sort of entice the public and create a firm foundation for why we should believe the Bible. And oh, by the way, and here are what our church teaches. And it's sort of a introductory process that people are initiated into the church. But as I've thought about it, it's kind of like, okay, but then they become part of the church, and that introductory period may have finished. What is the lens that they've been given as the very beginning of their journey into faith? And in the tradition I came from, much of it seems to center around Daniel and Revelation, end time prophecies, beasts and idols and things being poured out, and it's very intense and vivid. And how does this relate to the times we're living in now with the controversies in America and history and the church, the Catholic Church, that is? And all of that stuff, regardless of where your values lie, becomes the lens through which you interpret the Bible. What is the meta story? What is the large narrative that the Bible is really about? So that when we zoom into it all, we have some larger frame of reference to make meaning of it all. Some meta stories are better than others. Some meta stories focus our attention over here, when if you read the Bible kind of on its own merits, you find that actually the focus has been over here the whole time. So what biblical scholars and pastors and teachers and people who really delve into these things have known for quite a while is that if we're going to read the Bible with bias, we want to begin with the bias that the early writers of the Bible had, the early readers of the Bible had, so that we can join the original audience in listening to this stuff and interpreting it the way they would have interpreted it. And then, upon understanding it in their context, we'll be in a better position to interpret it into our context. Now, some of the best pastors and teachers that I've followed in these areas, I realized we're very good at what's called exegesis and hermeneutics. Now, these are not, the kinds of words that make it into our everyday lexicon, but the word exegesis refers to that deep research into all of the relevant factors. What culture, what was the culture around the time that Jeremiah was written, right? What was going on historically? What was going on politically? When he makes reference, when Jesus makes reference to this or that or the other, it's like, what was that a thing that people talked about? The parable of what is it? The rich man who dies and goes. No, the poor man dies and goes to Abraham's bosom, and the rich man who dies goes to some other place of separation and torment. And it's like, where did that come? Like, did Jesus come up with that story? Was he riffing off an existing story? If we don't know what we're doing, we're going to read into that a bunch of details that weren't actually native to the original time. And the audience, like we'll read backwards all these images of hell and the afterlife and burning and like eternal punishment and some of those might be very relevant to include in our calculations. But so many of those have been added after the fact. So pastors and scholars and people who are in the know, people who have learned these tools, they delve deeply into those things. The other side of it is hermeneutics. Now, roughly speaking, hermeneutics is the art of interpretation. So what we might say is that once you've got an understanding of what it meant to them at the time that it was written, now we want to understand what it means for us. And so there needs to be kind of a process in between those two poles whereby we sort of take liberties and what is the principle exactly that we're extracting from this, and how does it apply to a time and place and culture and situation that's so far removed from the original context. At best, 2,000 years ago on the other side of the planet with a people group who leveraged a very different part of their brain to our modern Western consciousness. So, hermeneutics and exegesis, a power couple strategy for interpreting the Bible. Now, there is still variation within those, because someone coming from, like someone who's Jewish and reading the Bible is going to see things highlighted that the average person is not going to see. You'd have to do a lot of study into ancient culture and symbols and motifs and literary conventions and things to pick up even a fraction of what a native Jew would see just right off the bat. And then you have people who like maybe African American heritage, and they're more familiar with a certain strand of history that's focused on social justice, and so they'll come to the Bible using the same principles of exegesis and hermeneutics, and they'll draw out a whole nother dimension of it. And this is one of the things we have to understand about the Bible, is that it is fascinatingly a generative text. In one way, the Bible says what it says. It's in black and white. It's on paper. It hasn't changed. We've made very sure of that. But at the same time, every generation that goes to the Bible seeking answers, asking different questions to the generation that went before, they will uncover new answers. Not inconsistent with what went before, but just looking at it from a slightly different perspective, asking different questions and getting sort of new insights. And so the Bible is this powerful text. I like to say that it's a psychomythological dual hemispheric technology, which is just my fun way of saying it's a book that's written in such a way that while you're reading it, it's reading you. There's a participation that was implied by this being a religious text. You're meant to walk away changed. You're meant to wrestle with it. It's meant to be ambiguous. It's meant to be difficult, so that you are called out of yourself to really engage with it. And the point is not the Bible tells you to do X, Y, and Z, so we're just going to tick off X, Y, and Z. That's not the purpose. Otherwise, it would be a very different book. The purpose is that by engaging with the text, we walk away transformed. There's something in, I mean, you've probably even noticed this. It's like when you could watch Facebook Reels and YouTube Shorts and TikTok videos for hours and hours every day, but because there's no wrestling, because it's not difficult, because you haven't needed to engage, you'll get up and you won't remember the last video you watched, let alone any of the videos you watched. You can watch TV like all week, and then when asked, like, oh, what did you learn? It's like, learn? Like, what are you talking about? I was entertained. I was occupied, but I didn't have to wrestle. Those mediums don't ask anything of you. And so when it comes to learning, one of the things that teachers do is that they give you not only the information, they want to open you up to seeing things from a different point of view, understanding things, receiving certain facts. But then they give you an activity so that you can embody that knowledge, so that you can use that knowledge. They test you, not just to evaluate where you're at, but in order to challenge you, that you recall the information, that you engage in applying that information in novel ways. It's the process of that wrestling whereby we walk away changed. It's ironic, actually, that the name Israel, for which the Jews later became known in the Old Testament and New Testament, it comes from the story of Jacob wrestling with God, or wrestling with the angel of God. And he injures his hip in the midst of that wrestling, where the angel says, let me go. And Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And he walks away limping, as it were, to demonstrate how, it's not a safe thing to engage on this level. But he walks away with a new name. The presence of God there says, you will no longer be called Jacob, you will be called Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. And in fact, the word religion implies a constant going back to the text, back to the rituals, back to the songs. It's a formative process. We are formed through our engagement with these things, thereby being transformed. Or another way to look at it is, it's not all about information, it's about transformation. And this transformation, it's voluntary, right? There are two kinds of students: those who actively engage with what's going on, and those who, they lean back, they don't lean forward, they don't engage, they don't have much invested. And so surely what you put into it, you're going to get out of it. If you don't put anything into it, you're probably not going to get much out of it. So it is with the spiritual life. And so it is with many people who go to church. They connect with people during the breaks, they sing the songs, they listen to the sermon. Oh, what was the sermon about? Oh, it was good. It was good. Oh, but what was it about? So, you have to have been there. There's an engagement that's implicit to the whole process. Otherwise, it's questionable what you're getting out of it. Anyway, and I think that's why Jesus, one reason, amongst many others, why Jesus taught in parables. I am not here to quench your thirst. I am here to make you thirsty. I am here to give you something that is a worthwhile puzzle. And once you grasp that it's up to you to engage with that thing, now you can wrestle with it. Now you can sort of tease it apart and spend hours, days, months kind of brooding over these mysteries that are worth brooding over because they orient you in a certain way. And if you're able to push through the difficulty of that, it opens your eyes to a whole new way of understanding things. When I was studying at uni, I came across this concept called threshold concepts. It's used in education, but I had to kind of go off on my own tangent to learn about it. Fascinating idea, these threshold concepts. If you want to develop mastery in any discipline, there are these specific lessons or insights that you need to grasp. And if you don't, you just won't understand how to navigate these things at a high level. They act like thresholds, doorways through which, one of the characteristics is they are hard to understand. There's a thing, you don't get it. And the second characteristic is you have to wrestle with it. You have to engage. It's like my old way of thinking can't get through this doorway. And so I need to wrestle. I need to whittle down my own understanding. I need to reshape not what I'm thinking, but I need to reshape the mind that's thinking it. I need to come at this from a new perspective. I don't even know what that perspective is yet, but I'm going to wrestle. And the wrestling transforms the person. That's another characteristic of threshold concepts. Another characteristic is you can't unlearn it. Once you grasp this insight, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you step across into this new space and you see everything from a new point of view. You are looking at things from an elevated perspective. That is what threshold concepts are. Ideally, an entire curriculum is based on these threshold concepts. A popular example that's used in the literature is if you want to be a chef, okay? You want to cook food. It's like naturally you want to get in there and start following some recipes and learning about, getting used to the practical side of, all right, I've got this much of this much of that, and you know what cooking looks like from the outside. You may have even done that, right? But if you want to be a chef, if you want to use the deep wisdom and insight that master chefs have, one of the first things you have to learn is how is heat transferred through the different implements and saucepans and pots and everything that you're using. That is a threshold concept, one that the average person wouldn't have even thought of. Oh, you mean a cast iron pot behaves different to a stainless steel pot? Oh, you mean like an element behaves differently to a gas stove top? Oh, okay. The heat, the level of heat and what it's being transmitted through, it affects differently the food that's being cooked. Different foods react differently. Different times being cooked, this is something that masters grasp because they went through a series of wrestlings. But if I just told you that, and you're like, oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, I'd never thought about that. You can walk away and not know how to apply that knowledge. you're semi-aware of it. It's like, oh yeah, I understand that these things are different, but you haven't really understood. You haven't stepped across that threshold. It's not practical knowledge to you. There's a difference between understanding something in your mind and applying it to what you're seeing. And seeing something, and your mind automatically interprets it according to this new insight. And you're seeing not only the event, but you're seeing the insight. It's like your brain has to bend over backwards to grasp this insight, but once it does, it alters what you're seeing. It's like Neo at the end of The Matrix. He sees the code. He sees the matrix, and it allows him to do extraordinary things because he can see it. So where are we? Bible interpretation, threshold concepts. Where are we going with this? So, what I'm sort of outlining for you, it's this depth to what we're doing when we read the Bible, that we bring our own biases to the text, and that's perfectly normal. Everyone does. But you want your biases to be the correct ones, and you can read it's one of the exercises that we did in an English class, I remember. It's like, watch this movie through a feminist lens, through a socialist lens, through this philosophy or that. When you have in mind one of these interpretive frameworks, a bias, different things stand out from the movie. Same thing with the Bible. Sometimes it's sort of our own personal framework that just comes from us being us. And sometimes it's a particular framework that we've adopted, a formalized system or philosophy or cultural set of assumptions, right? But when it comes to what the Bible is really trying to get at, there's a particular bias that I don't think people talk about very much. And that is that the bias that we are supposed to have is one of love. When you read the Bible, what does it look like to intentionally have a bias towards love? And how might that change the way that we read the text? This idea I learned from a contemporary continental philosopher named Peter Rollins. I recommend looking him up. But he was the one I heard who first, suggested this notion of, oh yeah, like we all have biases, but we can also choose our biases, right? That's a hermeneutic of love. So this, of course, I probably need to segue into what I mean by love. So today we have love is a very versatile word. I love my partner, but I also love tacos. So there are levels of it, right? And so it was in the biblical times as well. There are different words for love different words that all get interpreted in the Bible as love, which I find very confusing. I mean, the Bible uses separate words to describe what's going on, and so it means something very specific, but we've interpreted all of them as love, and so they all kind of blur together for us. We think they all mean the same thing. Turns out they were very different words. And this happens with other concepts in the Bible too, and maybe I'll do a podcast down the track about etymologies and word studies. But this notion of love. Okay. There's friendly or brotherly love. There's sexual love. There's all these different types in the Bible. But the one that we usually associate with God's love is the Greek word agape, charitable love. It often gets translated. Well, I spent some time researching into this, and it's funny how a lot of what's written on the topic, it's like, oh yes, this is self-sacrificing love, or it's what is it, self-sacrificing love, or charitable love. It's not needing anything in yourself, and so you're generous and just giving everything away. And I thought to myself, okay, this is interesting because firstly, when the Bible was written, some of these great philosophical thinkers had written about different kinds of love. Very little was written about this word for love. And I thought, okay, that's intriguing, because we know what philia means. We know what's these different, but not agape. Agape, the notion of what it means kind of gets developed post-Christianity. And what I thought was, well, of course it's thought of as self-sacrificing love because Jesus sacrificed himself. It's like, of course it's a generous, you don't need anything kind of love, because that's what Jesus was like. And so there's this Christological meaning kind of retrospectively added to what this word meant. But when I reflect on my experiences of these things, my notion of, after a bit of study as well, and kind of, trying to relate to this word, those interpretations make it sound like a strong force, like something you do, something that has like a lot of power behind it. I'm self-sacrificing. But it seems to me more like a weak force, like gravity. Gravity is constant, but everything bows to it in the end. The weak force of agape love is something more like, I'm good. I'm content. I'm mature and authentic and easygoing, and therefore I don't have anything I need. I don't need to fight for anything. I don't need my needs to be met because my needs are already met. Therefore, I'm able to be generous. I'm able to make sacrifices because I'm good. I'm taken care of. When I read that into the text, it makes more sense to me. And it's a subtle thing. It demonstrates a real change on the inside. It's not something that you do, except that it comes naturally out of this state of, because I have this relationship with God, I am in a position of not needing anything. And of course, I still need to eat. Of course, I still need shelter. I still need friends. I still need to occupy my time. Like, you don't become a clean slate robot, but you don't need anything. I'm good. I'm able to take care of myself. I'm comfortable. And you can be in that state even though you're waiting in line at the post office at the end of a long day. You can be tired and still content. You can be suffering and still be in a like an internal place of, yeah, okay, I'll suffer. Yep, no, I get it. I understand. All right, this one more thing. Oh, that again. There's an integrity to it, an internal security that I think agape is indicating us towards. It's an agape of being securely held in God's love, which is not always this gushing, romantic, I feel on like I'm on top of the world, a mountaintop kind of transcendent, euphoric kind of love. Great when that happens. But this is more of a, I am in a good place. And because I'm in a good place, I'm happy to extend that to others. I have patience to spare because I don't know, this place that I'm in inoculates me against impatience. I don't complain because I've got some resilience. I'm unaffected by the usual storms of anxiety and frustration. It's like, no, I'm good. I'm good because I've internalized this connection that I have with God. So what if we were to retrospectively project that into the Bible? What if that became our bias? It's a fascinating thing because in the New Testament, especially, not exclusively, but especially, there's this notion of old self versus new self. Paul is the Apostle Paul is the one most responsible for sort of transforming not only the Bibles and Jesus' teachings into a more abstracted form that we can philosophize about and theorize about, and it's sort of more intellectual, so a Greek audience is better able to engage with it. Or it's funny, the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, which is a very poetic language. It corresponds to the right brain, but the New Testament is written in Greek, which is very left brain. It's very intellectual, it's very abstract. And so it's almost as though, and I've thought about this too, it's like, it's almost as though the Old Testament people were wrestling with sin, wrestling with what it means to be faithful to God. They understood it a certain way. It had to do with their actions. Actions matter. But they kept falling to these problems. They kept making they keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And so it's almost as though God stepped in and said, okay, you guys are not getting this. The embodied, right brain, metaphorical, lived experience stuff is great. But the particular things you're getting hung up on need to be approached from a more cerebral, intellectual, philosophical, introspective kind of place. So now we're going to look at this from a Greek point of view. Now we're going to now we need like a prince among the philosophers. So Paul emerges on the scene and he abstracts it all. And he is, you can kind of tell in his writings that he too is kind of wrestling this out. He's engaging with these ideas, not only from his religious heritage, but also and not only this new thing they call the gospel and its implications for what the legacy of Scripture had been, but he's also wrestling with his own experience and the experience of people around him in what's sort of emerging onto the scene as a result of all this. He's calculating all of that and trying to give language to it. Now, the church for the next 2,000 years has been heavily influenced by Paul and his ideas about things, possibly because he's easier for a Western audience to understand. He's more direct. He's more explicit. But at the same time, most of us didn't understand exegesis. So we'd read it and we'd think we'd understood what he was saying. And we'd transform what he was saying into these doctrinal points. And we'll say, well, these are the things the Bible tells us to do. But we're missing kind of the key threshold concept. You know, Paul was a Greek and a Jew. He was educated according to, you know, the most profound literature, not only religious, but like ancient literature. We'd call it ancient literature, but the literature of his time. He understood rhetoric. He understood how to write in a compelling way, at least by the conventions of his time. He understood theology, at least from a Pharisaic point of view. And by the way, the Pharisees were not bad guys before Jesus turned up. Jesus just highlighted a bunch of their blind spots. But that, you know, we can see like now, it's like, oh yeah, those were bad things. But they were the best option at the time. If you were an everyday person, you looked up to these guys. They were trying to help you. So, where was I going with this? Okay, backtrack. When we read the Bible, what does it mean to have love? This agape, God's love, security, being the lens through which we bias the text. Now, I've got a couple of ideas about this. One idea is that this very notion of God's love being the state of security that we experience on a personal level because of our connection with God, and that being in that state, it influences an outcome in our behavior, in how we think, in how we relate to people from a much more comfortable and grounded kind of place. There's actually a word for that in modern psychology. The word is self. Now, again, let me digress. The word ego is the psychological word that we might associate in the Bible with the word flesh. Now, the flesh in the Bible is not bad, except insofar as it's been corrupted by sin. Flesh is actually just a normal part of who we are, and the same actually can be said of the ego. It's not that the ego is bad. It's that the ego underperforms with regards to maturity when it hasn't properly integrated, when it hasn't matured and become strong. So a strong ego is good, a weak ego is bad. Okay? But the self is something different from ego. Ego, funnily enough, is the Greek word for I. I. Singular pronoun. But what is it? But the self is this notion of like, who are you really deep down? What is the deepest part of you? Sort of below how you show up in different contexts, in different relationships, at different times. Like you've got many different parts of you, but what's the you that's even deeper than that? And this self, you know, it has other names as well, but we might associate that with the new self in the New Testament. This notion that Paul put across as your old self with all of its sinful desires, its corruptions, its selfishness, its short-sightedness, like all of that bad stuff about you symbolically has died so that you've got this new beginning and you're moving forward from a new self. And what is that new self like? Well, first of all, it's in Christ. But another way to think about it is this new self is the image of God that human beings were created according to in the very beginning, right? Before sin corrupted everything, human beings were made in the image of God. And what it means by being in Christ in this way, Christ is described in the New Testament as the very image of God. So there's this imageness, there's this likeness unto God that is deep down inside of us. And when you clear away the dross, when you've been refined and all of that bad stuff comes to the surface and it kind of gets scooped off like silver, gets purified, what you have remaining is the image of God, is the new self. And this self isn't impatient, it's patient. It's not acting out of self-interest. It's comfortable, doesn't have any needs. It's calm, cool, collected. It's curious rather than judgmental. It's friendly because it has nothing. It doesn't need to be guarded. It's an impenetrable part of us that many of us can't access because we've covered over with a lifetime of compromises and coping strategies and self-limiting beliefs and habits and biases that in the Bible constitute what some call a false self. So here's an interesting idea. For many years, I've heard people hold up this notion of authenticity as being this, it's authenticity. We want people to be authentic. We want our leaders to be authentic and all of that sort of thing. And I think what most people have kind of caught on to about that is, oh yeah, if you're a terrible person, we want you to be a terrible person. It's like, no. It's like, we want you to be authentic. But authentic good. So we want you to be authentic in only the good ways. We want to be ourselves. So if myself is, impatient or anxious, or actually that's probably what it is. Like a lot of our mental health is because so many people want to be authentic. And they've got the first part of the equation correct. We want to lay off these coping strategies, these false self attributes. But what we're left with is our dysfunction, our insecurity, our difficulty coping. And so we stop being able to cope. It's still that upper layer. It's not yet the self that is the image of God. It's not that agape, it's not capable of that agape love that says, I'm good, I'm okay. I can support others because I'm comfortable supporting myself. I don't need anything. I'm good, so I've put the oxygen mask on myself. I can now help someone else with theirs. Modern authenticity goes half the way. It says we don't want the coping strategies that mask who you really are. But where it falls short is the second half, where it's like, I know that I'm deficient. I know that I'm struggling. I know that I'm a victim. How do I get out of this? I'm being truthful insofar as this is me, I'm being authentic. But there's an even deeper authenticity, that says, oh, actually, I am made in the image of God. I am held in this secure relationship with God. I've internalized that security so that it carries me, it supports me. And now all the New Testament stuff starts making sense. No weapon fashioned against you will prevail. Cast on me all your anxieties because I care for you. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. It's like, oh, all of that's relating to some inner state. We don't want the coping strategies that turn into things like malice and jealousy and adultery and coveting and murder and accusation and like all that stuff. It's like, oh yeah, obviously that's bad. But so we lay that stuff down, or we keep it in the shadows. Now I'm being authentic. It's like, not quite. So there's this word in the Bible that gets used. And again, we presume we know what the word means. The word is hypocrite. Oh, I know what a hypocrite is. Like they act one way, but really they're another way. It's like, yeah. That's on the face of it. That's exactly what it means. Jesus is against hypocrites. He goes on about it quite a bit with the Pharisees in particular. It's like, okay. Have you considered that the word persona comes from the Greek meaning mask, and that the word hypocrite means actor, who at the time got up on stage wearing a mask that was associated with a particular character within the play. And so what a hypocrite was, effectively, was someone who's playing a role. Someone whose persona reflects the role that they're playing in a drama. It's not who they really are. Now, the actor could be a perfectly lovely person who you'd want to invite round for dinner. Or they could be a perfectly awful person who you don't want to spend much... Maybe they're smelly because they don't shower. Like, you don't know because they're wearing a mask. Jesus talked to the Pharisees, sometimes in very strong language, and he says, you guys are like whitewashed tombs. Now, whitewashed means it's like when you water down paint so that it'll stretch further. But it means that it's also thinner, so it doesn't... You paint over something and it doesn't, and the paint isn't effective in really covering up what you're painting because you've diluted it, you've stretched it too far. It's like, oh wow, yeah, he's calling the religious leaders whitewashed tombs on the outside, but inside they are dead men's bones, rotting corpses. Now, to religious people who are very let's say sensitive to clean and unclean laws, this was offensive on multiple levels. But he wasn't wrong. Because what Jesus was pointing at was there's an authenticity that's lacking. You're religious leaders, you're focused on doing good, you've got all of these different rituals and traditions and things that come along with being of this high status. You're practiced good people, but it's a role. It's a persona. You may even believe in the persona, but it's not who you really are. Now, this is the thing that becomes really difficult for some people to wrap their heads around. We assume rather, that when we show up and we act a certain way, that's the real us, because we're the ones acting that way. But it becomes problematic when acting a certain way too much, all that effort eventually gives way and we flip back the other way. You know, it's the stereotypical husband of a good Christian family who goes to church every weekend And on the surface, he preaches the sermon. He's an elder at the church. He does all these good things, and then you find out later that he's been abusing his family. Beating his wife and children, and like, whoa, where did that come from? He always seemed like such a nice person. Come to think of it, we have a word for that now. We call them, perhaps too often, narcissists. Someone who on the outside, they seem perfectly capable and charismatic and friendly and all that stuff, but get them alone and the mask comes off, and all of a sudden there's all this insecurity and controlling behavior, and sometimes violent and manipulative, and there's all that stuff. Oh no, I had no idea, because he was wearing a mask. Now, we can say we want authenticity, but we don't want that person to be authentic. We want that person to actually be what he purports to be. If he was to take the mask off in public and show us all who he really was, we'd all be horrified. So he keeps the mask on, protects all that insecurity. But you can't wear the mask all the time. It's a pretense. It's our own conscious attempt to be good. Incidentally, this is why the Bible says that you can't work your way to salvation. Your own good works and good deeds cannot make you a good person. Not because you're not living up to the role, the persona, the mask, but because no amount of external deeds changes who you are under the mask. We're getting away from the topic again. Sort of exploring all of these tangents. What does it mean to read the Bible with a bias of love? Part of it is that we understand who Jesus is as reflecting what God's like, and then using that to retrospectively interpret everything else. There are so many concepts in the Bible that get interpreted and applied in such a way that reflects our own defensiveness, controllingness, our superiority, our lecturing, our finger pointing, our biases towards not liking that person or that people group, or maybe our own traumas have made us ultra sensitive to certain things, and so we swing the entire Bible to being about that issue. And we distort the text. And maybe I do that to some degree by reading so much psychology into it, but I don't think so. I'm trying to highlight an aspect to this that is a worthwhile contribution to the conversation. What I'm sharing is not the only interpretation. It's a neglected insight that you'd only know to see if you first learnt, a bit about psychology, a bit about counseling, a bit about human nature in the modern age, and ironically, we got a lot of these ideas from looking at religion and spiritual traditions and those sorts of things. All right, where am I? So, one notion that I wrote down that I was going to talk about, but I obviously don't have time at this stage, is the notion of judgment. When we hear the word judgment, we think of people being judgmental, first of all. That's a bad thing. Two, we think of a courtroom with the judge, black gown, sentencing people to punishments, effectively. That is our frame of reference. That is our cultural bias a lot of the time. And much of Christian history, our theology, has reflected that same kind of idea. Let's read the Bible through legal frameworks that make sense to us, right? Now, that's a really important lens, but we have to understand it is a lens. It highlights some things, but it will hide others unless we use a different lens. And hopefully, using multiple different lenses, it highlights more of the text, which is, as I said before, a generative text. It gives you according to the questions you ask. Now, the ancient Hebrew mindset was very different. They'd been oppressed. They had been the victims. They had had their whole country stolen from them multiple times. They were doing all of the right things and trying to be a blessing in whatever context they were in much of the time, when they themselves weren't kind of off the rails. So when they thought of judgment, it's only condemnation and punishment if you did wrong. If you're in the right, you want there to be a court case, because it means that the oppression that's already been happening this whole time finally gets ruled on, and you get freed. You get freed from the oppression. You get compensated. This person who's been harassing you and the injustice of that situation finally gets dealt with. Judgment is a good thing. We want judgment. We want someone in authority to look at how we've been wronged and to make a decision and say, this injustice that's been going on for a period of time, that's been getting worse and worse and worse, that my judgment is this ends here. That is the judgment. The judge's job is to set things right, to shine a light on the situation, clarify what the truth is, and then make a decision that sets things right. And if you're on the side of the perpetrator, one of the things that needs to get set right is you. But if you imagine God being this epitome of the new self, the character for which we were made in his image, if we imagine God as the very sustaining force of this agape love, how would he judge? How would he set things right? How would he interpret what's going on? One thing is, he doesn't see victims and perpetrators. He sees how everyone's a victim of something and everyone's been a perpetrator of something. That's the complicated thing with biblical judgment, is everyone's been a perpetrator at some point of something. Everyone's fallen short of the glory of God, is how the Bible puts it sometimes. But likewise, everyone feels like a victim. So how do you set that right, except to kind of create this blanket amnesty that says, okay, have you been wronged? Come to me and we'll set this right. Have you caused wrong? Come to me and you'll be forgiven. However, this judge solves all of these complicated issues and here's the real point, gets us on track to making things better, he has to do so for the victim and for the perpetrator. One example of this might be for a couple of decades, provisions have been made for victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence. Wives and children, women and children, we've had to kind of understand what it is they're going through, the nature of their codependence to their partner, what needs to happen at the point that they're ready to leave that situation. and then put infrastructure in place to make it accessible to people like that, increase public awareness so that more people are not willing to let it slide under, sort of to happen under the table. But eventually someone asked, what about the husbands? What about the perpetrators of domestic violence? Oh, they're the bad guy. They should be punished. They should be put in jail. They should be fined. They should... Okay. Yes. All of that might be true. But what's causing them to act this way? Punishment doesn't solve the issue. It stops the ongoing injustice that's been happening. That's important. But what about him moving forward? You put him in prison, he gets out of prison, he's still the same person. And so there are services available for perpetrators of domestic violence to get the help they need. On the one hand, they need support to work through their own traumas, to learn better strategies for coping in relationships. But they also need to be held accountable to everything they did that contributed to that abusive relationship. And maybe they also need to pay some kind of recompense for that. But you need to see both sides. And both sides need to be treated differently, but towards the same end, which is, we want you to be able to move forward from this point in a more productive direction. We don't want you to keep going the way you've been going, but we also don't want you to keep going in a way that's a reaction to what you'd gone through before, because that can be equally off track. This is a kind of bias towards love. That when we read words like judgment, let's say, it's like, okay, let's think about what that means. Maybe what judgment means in the Bible is, in the Old Testament, there were centuries of Israel forsaking their covenant with God, committing all kinds of injustices, sort of falling into moral, sort of morally going off track. And God's patiently waiting for them to get back on track, to address these issues, to be responsible. And eventually, God has to say, okay, you guys are not going to turn around on your own, which means I am now stepping in. I am judging that this trajectory has to stop. So there's a judgment. And Israel gets taken captive by Babylon, and then captive to Medo-Persia, and then captive to a series of other occupying nations. And the people of Israel cry out, God, return us to our golden age. We want to be free again, and promise, and the Messiah, he's going to come and liberate us. And it's like, God's always been looking at them saying, okay, I want to give you all those things too. But are you willing to be transformed on the inside? Are you willing to wrestle with the text in a genuine and authentic way, where you become transformed, where you mature, where you take off the mask, and who you are underneath is being brought back on track? The Bible is full of themes like this. I want to give you your inheritance. But your old self isn't responsible for it, isn't responsible to that gift, is only going to cause more problems. Your old self has to die so that moving forward, your new self can receive the inheritance. Your new self, that is your true authenticity, beneath all of your insecurities and your coping and your reactions and your trying to live life on your own, the new self has stepped out of the old self of anxiety and depression and reactionary coping behaviors and biases and striving and compensating. The new self has stepped out of that into the security of being in relationship with God, where he carries our burdens for us. I don't need to be anxious because I've cast my anxieties on him. I still get anxious, of course, but I'm in the practice of noticing that, contending with what's going on inside of me, and then handing that to the one I've learnt to trust to carry those burdens for me, which leaves me to exhale. Many of the biblical promises, many of the ways that relationship with God is described relates to our own inner experience. It's the realm of psychology. It's the realm of introspection. It's the realm of existential wrestling and learning who we are and how we should be in the world. That is one of the primary, I would say, domains that the Bible concerns itself with. And if we learn to align ourselves with that, not abstractly in our minds, but relationally with our whole selves, if we're able to put our old self on the altar, sacrificing that, accepting the promise that moving forward from that point, we are a new self, we can live out of that agape place. Not in theory, but in reality. What I've learned is that these things, they can be read very abstract. They are not abstract. They are very real. They are really something that has been given to those who take it seriously enough to wrestle. Our culture doesn't encourage wrestling. We're somewhat averse to the necessary suffering of pressing deeply into our traumas and suffering. We'd rather pave it over. We'd rather wear the mask, not only to pretend to other people, but also to protect us from our own inner darkness. But God represents someone whose relationship makes it safe for us to take the mask off. And maybe that's why some of our older denominations have a practice of confession. I'd like to fess up to who I really am. Let me take this mask off, if only for a couple of minutes, and reveal and speak what's really been going on. Bring it to light, and the light will judge and set things right. All right, that's probably enough for one day. You've been very kind letting me ramble about this, but yeah, it's been another privilege. I appreciate you sticking around, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Join the Facebook group and the YouTube channel. We'll be doing this every week. Until next time, au revoir.